Watch this.
It's very difficult to have them meet in the middle on anything really.
Especially in the middle of a tense conflict. What's happening on the ground in Gaza and how that is impacting what is happening here in Idaho. We're down to hours for you to file your income taxes. And if you're one of those cool kids who's into blockchaining, well, don't forget, cryptocurrency counts too. And if you did forget, well then, you might want to download that extension form. Because no one wants to be in trouble with the IRS. We're revisiting what happened when one former Idaho family's taxes were rejected for what the feds felt was fraud. But that was because of faulty numbers, like big numbers. God created war so that Americans would learn geography. It's a famous quote attributed to Mark Twain and proven to be true, especially over the last few years. You could probably point to Ukraine on a map at this point, or at least describe where it is. But most recently, at least since last October, maybe you were inclined to look up just how small that strip of land that borders Israel is. And if you followed the news this weekend, you know the war between Israel and Hamas now has a third player, Iran. It makes for a timely introduction across Boise, where new billboards have popped up overnight. They're from a pro-Israel organization that wants to send a message: Jews should not be afraid or silent about who they are. Here's Andrew Bartline.
Down a Boise arterial, off the corner of Allenbaugh. A new message is fair in view.
It's so much bigger than I anticipated.
The Idaho-Israel Alliance put up 3 Boise billboards to share one single thought. With founder Don Berger.
It's one thing to be pro-Palestinian, but it's another thing to be anti-Israel. And that's where I get really uncomfortable.
And that's why the wording's precise.
The language is a bit kind of in your face, but we chose that on purpose to really wake people up. Because Palestinians are not the problem. I believe in a two-state solution, and I think that vilifying an entire people for what Hamas did is not fair.
On October 7th, Hamas killed 1,200 Israelis. In ongoing war since, local health officials say Israel's killed 33,000 people.
And as soon as they put their arms down, and as soon as they release the hostages, this war will be over.
But now, the war's gotten more complicated.
The only time I've left Israel was to go to Ukraine for the 2-year mark.
Zach Anders is an American journalist covering war abroad.
I left the moment it happened.
What we in the States only see on TV, through a phone screen, Zach's documenting in real time the impacts on real lives.
Now that I've seen both wars, I don't know that I'll ever let that go. Palestinians and Israelis have been picked last, just to make a simple analogy, in a lot of ways. Escalating now because we have direct confrontation between Iran and Israel.
The large-scale Iranian attack only further pushes in on the Jewish state and further forces their hand.
Generations of Israelis have now served and fought and defended their country against neighbors and enemies who have wanted to destroy them. What we're seeing here is an indiscriminate campaign in certain ways to target Hamas and eliminate Hamas fighters.
The indiscriminate policy has unjust killings, the reality of war, and people don't let it go.
And that breaks my heart.
But Don knows the other side, where Jewish and Israeli nonprofits report a rapid rise of anti-Semitism in the States.
And Jews,
for Don,
have inherently, as a result,
that's one he won't let go.
Didn't really look to be outward about their Judaism.
And he hopes the billboards make it clear.
Jew belong or you belong in the kind of big tent that is Judaism.
I don't know where I land on it politically, I really don't. And the more time that you spend here seeing and speaking to both sides, the harder it is to come to a conclusion.
Don says there are roughly 3,000 Jewish people in Idaho, whether that be a religious connection, an ethnic connection, or a cultural connection. He says it's often a mix of those three, and the Alliance billboards want to tell those people with any capacity, connections to being Jewish, that you are allowed to be Jewish in Idaho. Because even getting, brief thoughts from our friend Zach in Tel Aviv outside the Strip, saying how complicated it is. It's war. It can't be so black and white. It's always more nuanced than that.
That's what I was going to say to you. And it's obviously something you can't describe or sum up in a 3.5-minute story in the middle of an afternoon. I mean, it's hard to do that, obviously. Yeah. No time was our anti-Semitic tone in the United States probably higher prior to World War II, but you can't say it's gone away, obviously.
Yeah,
So,
it's just not the reality of the situation.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
And I'm sure it goes the other way, too.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Andrew. Doctors prescribing puberty blockers, hormone therapy, or other gender-affirming care to children has been outlawed in Idaho since January 1st. It still is, but now, with the ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court today, that ban can now be enforced. The opinion overturns a stay issued late last year by a federal judge just before the ban went into effect, after a lawsuit was filed by the families of 2 transgender teenagers. They were receiving gender-affirming care, and they sued the state of Idaho to continue doing so. Judge Lynn Windmill agreed last December and put the law on hold until the lawsuit could be settled. Judge Windmill pointed to the 14th Amendment at the time as the reason for his decision. Its purpose, to protect disfavored minorities from legislative overreach, he wrote. Attorney General Raul Labrador, one of the named defendants in that lawsuit, would appeal and filed an emergency motion with the highest court in the land back in February. Today's decision is only a partial stay of that original stay, meaning the 2 plaintiffs in this case can still receive the gender-affirming care that they are receiving while the lawsuit proceeds. Everyone else in Idaho, though, is now subject to that new law, which could put a doctor in prison for 10 years should they provide hormones, puberty blockers, or other gender-affirming care to anyone under 18. Attorney General Labrador is lauding the decision, saying he's proud to defend Idaho's law, saying the state has a duty to protect and support all of Idaho's children, ensuring they are not subjected to these life-altering drugs and procedures. Denying the basic truth that boys and girls are biologically different hurts our kids. Meanwhile, the ACLU of Idaho, who filed the lawsuit on behalf of the 2 families, says, well, while this ruling today did not deal with the constitutional question of this law, it is nonetheless an awful result for transgender youth and their families across the state. Today's ruling allows the state to shut down the care that thousands of families rely on while sowing further confusion and disruption. ACLU says they are more determined to defeat this law in court. All right, some of you may remember when waiting until the last minute to file your income taxes meant you literally had to wait in line to drop them off at the post office, hoping to get that postmark that still read April 15. Well, that day is today. But these days, those days of figuring out how to fold all that in packets of paperwork into an envelope are long gone for a lot of us. And for most of us, it's all being done online. But what if your income is something done online, like in the form of cryptocurrency? Some might think, well, since that's not really an accepted currency in U.S. banks, no need to account for that when it comes to taxes, right? Well, the son of a CPA joins us. Joe Paris, you've spoken with a national expert on this. So is that true?
It is true, and let me be very clear that I did not interview my father for this story, but I grew up with this, so it was something top of mind today. Crypto and digital assets aren't something the IRS or the American government ignores. They're fully aware of it all, and they are fully aware that Idahoans who deal with it owe the government on gains. The IRS says that virtual currency is treated as property, and general tax principles, they are applicable to property transactions applying to using this virtual currency. Long story short, they're keeping an eye on it. But most importantly from the IRS, when you sell virtual currency, you must recognize any capital gains or losses on that sale. And I had a great conversation about it with Jackson Hewitt's Chief Information Officer on taxes. A big piece of advice, be wary about where you're getting that information.
There's some plausible deniability out there spawned by some of these TikTok tax specialists that say, don't worry about it. They can't track it. They can't find you, which is not true, false, fake. But you really have a hard time not being able to just do your favorite search engine and understanding the basic elements of virtual currency. If you're happy, then that's probably a good indicator that you need to be talking to somebody or understanding the rules yourself. Because I invest in it, my sons do as well. And anytime they call me and say, hey, guess what? You know, I'll say, hey, guess what? I'm guessing you got a taxable event coming along. Oh, man. Yeah, that's how that works. If you're happy with a stock sale, if you're happy with a capital asset sale, if you're happy with a virtual currency transaction, odds are you've got something that you're going to need to put on your taxes.
And moving forward, a new form will outline crypto considerations very specifically. So make sure you're keeping track of things.
Not only are there real consequences, in fact, even for those who are aware they kind of know they had a good year until they sit down with their pro. Oh my goodness, you had a really good year. You owe some of that money to the man. And so a lot of it's on self-assessment, as you well know right now, but that's changing in about 8 months, in 2025, when there will be actually a new 1099, a 1099 DA for digital assets, that people won't be so much on the honor system as they are today. You'll know, the IRS will know, and everybody will know what your reporting obligation is. So best you get practiced on that now, rather than finding out you had some gains next year and they decide to do a look back. So make sure you understand the rules and make sure you do it correctly on your tax return. The headache you can prevent is probably a pretty big one by doing it right.
So there is a midnight deadline, and Brian, one of the reasons we did this story today is I personally did some research. There are influencers out there telling folks, "Now, don't worry about crypto. The government doesn't know." And talking to the experts today, they say, well, the government might not know right now, but ask Martha Stewart. They will catch up with you at some point.
Okay, he mentioned transactions, so that's the only thing you have to report. What about the value? Because that changes all the time.
And that's one of the things, too, is depending on what you have, depending on the currency or the assets you have, things could be different in your portfolio. The bottom line, though, is the experts, they say that if you think you can hide this from the government, you can't. So don't try and do that.
All right. Thank you very much, Joe. You got till midnight tonight. Well, according to the IRS, last tax season, more than 213 million of all filings were done electronically. For individuals, it was closer to 94%. Back in the early days of online filing, there was nowhere near that many who did it. And it wasn't without its problems. Probably why. Probably none more than unique, though, or no more unique, I should say, than the letter one lieutenant colonel based in Mountain Home received from the IRS 25 years ago. And if you think being good with numbers is the best way to survive tax time, wait till you see the numbers this family had to deal with in this 208 redial from 1999. Here's John.
Take a good look at Stephen Rissling. How old could he be? Older than his twin brother Neil?
He's older than me.
That depends on who you ask. Like his dad, Lieutenant Colonel Eric Rissling.
And dads probably know the ages of their kids and whatnot.
Well, we thought we were pretty sure about it.
Until he electronically filed his taxes this year, including a $400 child tax exemption for Stephen.
This is what says it was rejected.
A notice sent straight back to headquarters. So Eric filed right back again.
Came back rejected one more time, apparently because he was over 17.
How much older than 17?
Well, apparently 98 years.
Seems the Social Security office had recorded 5-year-old Stephen as being born September 18th, 1883.
That would make him 115.
115.
Yikes.
I started working for Social Security in 1974. I haven't seen any like this one.
District Manager Dennis King says it was probably an errant keystroke at Social Security that accidentally set Stephen back 110 years.
He's pretty limber for 115, huh? Boy is 115, but he does have incredible artistic talent already. What's the other one there?
Let's see. I'm told that's a pig.
And this is his birth certificate, proving Stephen a normal 5-year-old boy.
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
Dad can't believe it happened to him.
But I feel I can't lose in this case because either we'll get the $400 tax exemption for him if it's correct, or he's got an awful lot of Social Security payments coming to him.
Either way.
We're filing by paper this year, though, rather than electronically, just to make sure.
John Miller, Idaho's News Channel 7.
Okay, so did the Rislings get their child tax credit? Yes, but it wasn't without some stress. We were able to track down Lieutenant Colonel Risling today. He retired from the military about 12 years ago and went to work for NASA for about 10 years. He's now 2 years into full retirement and living in Yorktown, Virginia, which is one of the original colonies set up in the Commonwealth back in the 1600s, which might explain the issues we were having today trying to connect with Eric Risling. Perhaps Yorktown's technology is still stuck in colonial times.
IRS has never really told us completely why, but they did finally determine that Steve was not 106 or 116, but was in fact 6 years old.
Like you work for the U.S. government, so this shouldn't have been a big problem.
Well, I mean, we've never really figured out why, but we suspect it had to do with the fact that he has a twin brother, and they were born in Holland while we were over in Europe. And they were born on what's called on the economy in the civilian hospital there in Holland, which gave them a Dutch birth certificate. And then I had to go down to the U.S. consulate's office in Amsterdam and register them as Americans born abroad. And
And that was when we lost Eric. We couldn't get Zoom to work either, so we were kind of left using FaceTime, as you saw, and it was just the whole thing. Anyway, he was able to get in his his 3 years. He did tell us before that went away, his last 3 years, or his only 3 years, stationed Mountain Home, one of his family's favorite assignments, so that's good. As for Stephen, his son, the IRS claimed was born in 1883 and not 1993. Well, he's not 141 today, but 31, and working at the nuclear power plant in Surrey, Virginia. His brother Neil is in the military as well. But maybe if there was some freak accident at the plant where Stephen gets exposed to enough radiation, he could possibly live to 141 years old. I don't know. At least that's how I understand it from the Marvel movies. Between the dozens of Dateline episodes and podcasts and documentaries and books being written, one would think we've probably seen or heard it all when it comes to the Vallow-Daybell murder trials. But on the third day of testimony in Chad Daybell's trial, we're shown never-before-seen video from his arrest on the day officers found the remains of JJ and Tylee on his property. Here's Jude Binkley with today's 411.
Sounds like you're not going to be out.
Right. Yeah, I'm not coming back.
Jurors and the public saw video of Chad Daybell's arrest for the first time in day 3 of Daybell's trial. Daybell is accused of murder and conspiracy in the deaths of 2 of his current wife's children, J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan, as well as his first wife, Tammy Daybell. Daybell was arrested on June 9, 2020, the day officers found the remains of JJ and Tylee on his property. Rexburg Police Detective Eric Wheeler testified that while law enforcement searched his property, Chad went to his daughter Emma's house. When he left, Wheeler says he sped away from his daughter's house, and in Wheeler's experience, that could be indicative of guilt. There was also testimony from 3 other law enforcement members today. Court is back in session tomorrow. There will be an opportunity for the public to honor J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan. Kay Woodcock, JJ's grandma, says it will be next Saturday, April 27th. Visitation is from 11 to 1, then the service will be after from 1 to 2. It will be at the Colonial Theater in Idaho Falls. Seating is first come, first serve. Melba High School turns 100 today. On April 15, 1924, the State Board of Education officially accredited Melba High School. The principal of Melba High School, Eric Forsgren, said they're celebrating the centennial at graduation, where they'll recognize the 100th graduating class and the graduates before them. Graduation is on May 24th. And that's the 411 on the 208. I'm Jude Binkley.
You know, it's kind of a go-to for Idaho. It's kind of a badge of honor to point out how many generations their family has been in the Gem State. Well, not many family fun centers can lay claim to being here as long as Pojo's, long enough for the great-grandkids to get involved. Pojo's calls themselves home of the Boise's best birthday parties. Well, they're throwing a pretty big one for themselves this month.
If you've grown up in the Treasure Valley in the last half century, then you know about Pojo's. It was opened by the Wood family 50 years ago, and 4 generations later, it's still a family-owned business.
My father opened up Pojo's in 1974. We were at the corner of El Dorado and Fairview. He saw an ad in the paper for this Pojo game. It was an 18-hole golf course played on irregular shaped pool tables. So that's how we got the name Pojo. We couldn't call it Pogo because of the pogo stick, so it was called Pojo's.
It started with just a few video games. Then in 1992, Pojo's moved to its current location on Fairview, near Westgate. Welcome. And that's where the game was upped.
And a lot of the bigger simulator games, like the driving games, batting cages, different stuff like that, we just loaded it up. We added the bumper cars in 1994, and that was a real hit. We added the carousel in 1996. We cut out the wall. We made it look so when you're driving down Fairview Avenue, you can see that carousel at night.
The carousel animals were even picked especially for the Family Fun Center.
Yeah, my father did. He wanted to make sure there's animals that were, you know, like a bobcat. Idaho has bobcats. A deer. Idaho has white-tailed deer. A Appaloosa, you know, because it's the Idaho horse.
As the years spin on, so do people's interests.
You know, when video games first came out, they were the main focus of our business. But not so much anymore. More or less, it's the merchandisers, the games that give out the tickets. You know, people like to win something. So video games aren't the focus of an entertainment center anymore. I believe it's more of the redemption.
Even after 50 years, people can find that redemption and the happiness that comes with it all at Pojo's.
Well, I don't think God's going to give me 50 more years, but we're going to ride it out. We're going to be here as long as the kids want to run it. That's how long we're going to be here.
And they still get a pretty good deal on a hot dog. At least the sign out front says that. So stop by. You can visit Pojo's Monday through Thursday, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Friday and Saturday, they're open until 11 at night. Sundays, only from noon to 10. Welcome back. All right, let's get to your comments on this Monday. This one from Brian. In reference to the transgender law, what happened to the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Well, those that passed this law in the legislature say it's about protecting kids. Unfortunately, those on the other side say this is something that should be left to the parents and the kids and the physicians, which is kind of what John in Boise had to say. Our AG continues the Idaho GOP tradition of deciding what health care Idaho citizens may receive, despite what the family physician and the parents think is best for their child. Unconscionable. Although it's the legislators, the AG is just defending it proudly, as he says. The message, is it okay to be Jewish in Idaho? Is it also okay to be Muslim? Sure it is, Jack. Just don't ask me to put it on a license plate.